another great day out here in the desert, and as you can see, very beautiful. I gotta watch my step here now. One thing I realized very quickly is the importance of having some good hiking shoes, because all of this gravel you see here on the ground, when I tell you that if you don't have the right shoes, man, it will catch you. And one time I slipped and scarred up my leg. Man, that was something else. And so, yeah, you got to make sure you have the good sneakers. Now, why am I talking like this? Why am I talking so quiet? Well, we just did a video recently where we talked about, this is part of our series on the history or the origins of the Holy Spirit. And in one of the sections of this series, we talked about the importance of quiet. And, you know, when in the church world, we were taught, you know, I could feel the Holy Spirit coming in right now. And then you got the organ player playing, and then you got someone up there singing, and then you got people, just praising. Oh, I can sense them. Ah! But what we learned is that, number one, when we were created, just like a seed, everything that you ever needed was already put inside of you. Everything. So we talked about where this whole Holy Spirit thing actually came from. I'm not going to go through all of that. Just check the links in the description below, and we talked about that. But one of the things we talked about in this series, we talked about how what happens to your body when you immerse yourself in quiet. And it's the opposite of what we were taught in church. You know, you think that, oh, I could feel them. And you run in your mouth and you got the noise up and you got the music up and all that stuff. But it's the opposite is actually true. And one thing that we've been encouraging people who watch us to do is just simply, if you want to learn about your Creator, look at creation. Look at creation, right? Look at creation. And creation teaches us so many things if you take the time to watch and listen. When you look at plants, when I come out here in this desert here, I love coming out here because it is so quiet. I mean, you hear some planes in the background now, but but minus the planes, it can be the most quiet and the most peaceful place. And this is the desert, but you don't have to live out here. Same thing if you live near a forest or in a nice park or whatever. And so what we talked about is, I did a breakdown of what happens to your brain when you immerse yourself in quiet. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna play a clip of that teaching we did, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more, okay? Okay, so this is an article that I found. It's a short one here. Now, the benefits of silence to our brains. In short, I'll just kind of encapsulate what this article is saying, is that when you immerse yourself in silence, what is happening to your brain is that your brain is growing new brain cells. That's what happens when you immerse yourself in silence. And they said a 2013 study of mice published in the journal Brain Structure and Function used different types of noise and silence to and monitored the effect of sound and silence had on the brains of the mice. The silence was intended to be the control in the study, but what they found was surprising. The scientists discovered that when the mice were exposed to 2 hours of silence per day, they developed new brain cells in the hippocampus. Hope I'm saying that right. And they said that's a region of the brain associated with memory, emotion, and learning. I'm stopping here because I want to make sure that stays baked in your mind there for a minute. So these brain cells
begin to multiply in the part of your brain that's associated with memory, emotion, and learning. Total silence, not music, silence. The growth of these new cells in the brain does not necessarily translate to tangible health benefits. However, in this instance, researcher, and they named the researcher, says that cells appear to become functioning neurons. In this sense, silence can quite literally grow your brain. They said we saw that silence is really helping the new generated cells to differentiate into neurons and integrate into the system. They said follow-up research found that the default mode is also used during the process of self-reflection. In 2013, and this is in the journal, I guess, of Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, Joseph Moran wrote that the brain's default mode network is observed most closely during the psychological task of reflecting on one's personalities and characteristics, self-reflection, rather than during recognition, thinking of the self-concept or thinking about self-esteem, for example. Okay, that's get more into the weeds a little bit there. Silence seems to have the opposite effect of the brain to noise. While noise may cause stress and tension, silence releases tension in the brain and body. And then they go to another study. A study published in the journal Heart discovered that 2 minutes of silence can prove to be even more relaxing than listening to relaxing music. Ain't that something? 2 minutes of silence, according to this one study, they're saying can be more effective than listening to relaxing music. So you don't even need the aid of music. You don't need the aid of music to get your brain to grow. You know how, I know when our children were babies, the big thing was Mozart for babies, because it stimulates their brain and all this other stuff, right? And it's not saying that music isn't bad. Music definitely has its place, but the best place for your brain to be in, if you want your brain to grow, is to immerse yourself into a place of silence. Now, Dwayne, how has this all got to do with the Holy Spirit? Exactly. What I'm trying to tell you is this: you don't need a Jewish ghost to come upon you. That's number one. I think we've already kind of settled that. Number two, you don't need an organist or someone to play certain notes and all of that in order to get you to vibrate at a certain place, because the person that's doing the vibe, that's issuing out the frequencies, more often than not are the people that are manipulating you. If I was getting up here and saying, Om, say it with me, Clayton, Om. If I was doing that, to a certain degree, I am ultimately going to manipulate you. That's why I said all of that is garbage. I don't care if it's the people in India doing it. I don't care if it's the preacher doing it. It doesn't matter. If they are the ones that are issuing out this artificial frequency, if you will, more often than not, what they are doing is manipulating you. And so what we're finding is your brain actually grows the most when none of that is present. Is immersing yourself in silence. Now, here's the thing that's really funny about this. When you look at all these multimillionaires and these billionaires or whatever, there's a reason why they build their cabins out in the woods somewhere. And they'll come back and say, honey, we don't have any internet out there. It's just total quiet. What's his name? You got many people who have done that, and they come back and build multi-billion-dollar businesses. They're quiet. And so with animals, what we've learned so far is that animals, they'll make noise, but they're very intentional about the noise they make. It's simply communicating with each other. It's keeping it on a low. You're not going to see a bunch of elephants, just all day and all night, just making noise and all that, just running their mouths. They ain't going to do that. Now, they'll talk amongst themselves, they'll communicate amongst themselves, but it's very intentional. Now, how does that translate to us? Many of us live in a culture, live in a society where we make too much noise. We live in a very noisy environment. You go on social media, we're running our mouths. You go on the radio, we're running our mouths. You go on our music, we're running our mouths. We are constantly running our mouths over and over and over again. And black folks are definitely no exception to that. I actually looked up the cultures. There are cultures out there that are known to be quiet, more on the quiet end of the spectrum. And that's Asian cultures. And it was actually, I think it was like a Norwegian culture. There was a whole study just based off of that. But isn't it something that when you look at these Asian cultures, that's where you're finding these people are coming out with the most innovation as of late. Now, it doesn't mean that those of us of African soil or African heritage or whatever, it doesn't mean that we didn't have a silent culture. We did. In fact, all indigenous cultures, when you look at them, they had a part of their culture where it was very quiet. I mean, if you've ever seen some of these villages or whatever like that, they weren't always making noise. They weren't always partying and getting down and all of that. They had to learn to be quiet, going out there and taking care of the animals, the sheep and all that, the cattle and all that. Those were times of being silent. You didn't hear airplanes flying over you. You didn't hear trucks and all that stuff. It was silent. Do you understand what I'm saying? And then you would lay outside at nighttime. It was silent. It was quiet. And the only time you would communicate when you're in those indigenous cultures is with your brother and your sister, your fellow villagers. That's it. And that was it. But it was no like you out there and you got your radio on and you just blasting it and all this other stuff. You didn't do all that. It was silence. Silence ultimately ruled the day.
So if you want to know why, one of the main reasons our people are so in lockstep with a lot of emotionalism, fear, anger, all of these things. And it's like our mindset seems like it just hasn't changed. In all of these years, it just seemed like it hasn't changed. When you are always feeding yourself a lot of noise, and it doesn't have to be just music. It could just be, if you listen to back-to-back videos over and over again, you're listening to one now, right? I mean, so one of the things that it's a very simple principle, but I'm gonna tell you, it's probably one of the most powerful lessons that I've learned, and that is the importance of surrounding myself in quiet as much as I can. I mean, we live in a very noisy environment, not just audible, but also when we're dealing with light noise, for example. At night, when I want to look at the stars, depending on where you live, you can't see them because there's so much light frequency from the ground, from street lights, from, car headlights, things like that, that's interfering the atmosphere to such a degree you can't even see the stars. Our ancestors back in the day didn't have that problem. And so there's so much information that our Creator is constantly relaying to us that we miss out on because our ears are so occupied or our eyes are so overstimulated, with TV, LED lights, things like that. And we have to learn to calm it and to turn that stuff off and reduce it, because when you don't do it, what it does is, and like I said in the video, it reduces the chances for your brain to actually grow. Your ability to think things through, to process, your ability to regulate your emotions, things like that. So just sitting in quiet, it can really make a huge difference. And so when you look at, like I said, when you look at these plants, for example, you don't see plants out here arguing. You don't see trees out here just going about, they just be going fussing and all that stuff. You don't see that at all. Mm-mm. Plants grow. In this series, we also talked about how plants tend to thrive in quiet. And when we talked about even animals, for example, we also did a part where we talked about animals. Animals only communicate when they have to. And they said that's usually around feeding time. But other than that, most of the times, if you go into the desert or if you go into a forest, you really don't hear too many animals. I mean, every now and then you'll hear some, but not really, because they don't want to bring too much attention to themselves. So they learn to be quiet and to listen to their environment. And it helps, and what that does is heightens your awareness of your environment. So you can, and it heightens your discernment as well. So this is what I try to do as much as I can. And I'm gonna tell you, since I've been doing this even more, I've been really feeling that creative part of me to really start come alive again. And it's like, it's like, okay, this is how it's supposed to be, like I'm getting back into artwork again. And and just, yeah, it's really powerful. So I would encourage you to do that. So, find you a good place where you can, in this world, in this noisy world, where you can immerse yourself in some quiet. And I'm gonna tell you, it's gonna make a world of difference.